So the first people who saw the first steam engine that only had 5% efficiency in the late 1700s, which was used to barely pump water out of mines, would never suspect it was about to lead to a revolution known as the Industrial Revolution. The first people who saw the first internal combustion engine cars clattering down the roads in the 1860s never suspected it would change our society fundamentally into the suburbia and everything else we see today. And looking at this, you'd never suspect that that's going to lead to an even more powerful revolution, probably the most powerful revolution in history. Now most people think that these just create toys and fun little statues and things. But as I'm going to show you, this is the instigator of a very, very powerful revolution. So my talk is divided into two parts. The first part is the path I followed to get to where I am right now, which is a strange one, and I thought I wanted to share it. Now, when I was in university, I could never stay awake in lectures because for me, life around me proceeds in slow motion. I just cannot stand how slow things happen. That's just the way I perceive the world. And so what I wanted to do is give you a taste of my world a little bit where I'll have a lecture the way I like to have a lecture, where slides are going really fast. So what I want you to do is get your pens and paper ready because I'm going to give you little tidbits of information which I spent a lifetime collecting from some of the most creative people around the world. And you may not get any of this ever again anywhere else. And it's only going to be on the screen for 5 or 10 seconds. So you got to be ready to jot it down. So you ready? My strange path. Okay, there are my parents. My father, Italian-American. My mother, French-Canadian Métis. My mother was a teenager when she met my dad. They were both had to leave school to support their family, which was very common in the 30s and 40s, right? And my father was a veteran in the United States Army, and he was the sole survivor of several battles, Catanine Pass, Sicily landings, Monte Cassino, Anzio. So imagine, he survived as the sole survivor of his platoon in all these battles, right? And he was also General Patton's translator in Italy, because he spoke fluent Italian. Anyway, he said of all that thing, the thing that upset him the most was the concentration camps that he liberated. So you see here, they're carrying the prisoners out. And this is relevant to what I'm about to say later, that's why I include it here. He was a photo engraver under the GI Bill afterwards. He learned how to be a master photo engraver, which is an obsolete profession today, but very vital at that time. And he was involved in these projects. He was a photo engraver at this project, this one. Now, I'm not going to tell you all the information. I assume that you'll be able to fill in the blanks. You know what the submarine that is? That's the Nautilus, the first nuclear sub. Previous one, what's that? The Avro Arrow, Canada's top fighter aircraft that was canceled by Diefenbaker. He was involved in these projects, and he was involved in designing the plates to make the currency. That's what photo engravers do. Right? And there's my mother, a model right on the edge here. And that's important too. That's a very important thing about my future. You might not think so. Now what's that? Sputnik. I was born the same month that Sputnik was launched into the space age. There's the first picture of me. Okay, now this is me, and my house had only 2 sets of books. It had the complete set of the World Book Encyclopedia because my father valued knowledge, and he subscribed to a very expensive magazine called Wisdom Magazine, which is probably the best magazine ever published. You can now get them online for $125 an issue, right? So this is what I read as a kid. I would leaf through every page of the World Book Encyclopedia. And my mother was very concerned because I had absolutely no interest in people. I never looked at people, I never looked at her, never looked at my dad, but I looked at books and I loved machines. So I also loved animals. I had an amazing fixation on animals, and animals loved me too. So I would take a machine and take it into its component parts. Every machine in the house wasn't safe from me. The vacuum cleaner, the sewing machines, everything. I took everything apart because I wanted to know how they worked. So there's me. In those days, parents said, go out and play. Today, parents say, stay in and be safe. But in those days, they'd say, go out and play, and I would spend hours doing civil engineering projects in the sandbox. Right? Right, what's this? I was born within sight of Yale University because my father was American, of course, right? And I was born within sight of this, and this is critical to my future because my father had an old war buddy who got one of the first computers that Yale ever got, an IBM 700 series. And so here, I remember at 3 and 4 years old going to do punch cards. And I started to learn how to program in assembler, in Fortran. BASIC didn't exist then, Fortran. And this is where I learned to love my love of technology. So here's tidbit number 1. Get your kids interested in high technology right from the start. There's no lower age limit. Babies, get them involved in the stuff, right? And it'll pay off later on. Also, anyone know this place? This is the Peabody Museum attached to Yale University. This is my favorite place. This is where I learned to love dinosaurs. This is also relevant to what I'm going to say later. And kids have amazing observations. I talked to the curator. My father used to bring me here every weekend. I said to the curator, they're mounted wrong. He goes, what do you mean? Well, on the trackways, the fossil trackways that I saw in the World Book Encyclopedia, there's no tail marks. So therefore, the tails are mounted wrong. We now know that dinosaurs didn't drag their tails. They held them at balance outwards above the ground. And now all these specimens have been remounted. I'm not taking credit for this. Okay, so my father died when I was 5 years old of meningitis. He got sick on a Friday, died on a Sunday. My mother was totally unable to handle it. And so we ended up, the funeral cost more than our house was worth. And so we ended up homeless. So I can remember my memory sitting on a street in Montreal with all our furniture around us. It's a really low point. Anyway, this is where my mother's beauty comes in. It was a very important factor. So my mother couldn't take care of me, so she put me into this residential school because apparently I wasn't white enough to go to a white boarding school. And so this was run by the church, and it was as bad as they say they were. And, you know, here's Attila the Nun and Father Fondle. Right? And I had a perfect report card. I was a straight F student. Right? And my mother actually was so ashamed that she would tell people, my son has a perfect report card. She wouldn't say straight F, but she said he had perfectly homogeneous marks, yes. Okay, and I was called the dunce of the class because I couldn't pass any test. I never passed a spelling test, couldn't do arithmetic or anything. Well, I was also pretty miserable at this place because they're always beating you up for everything. However, here's an interesting thing, is that the nuns had an abhorrence for the left hand because the left hand's the hand of the devil, and I was left-handed. So every time I used my left hand, bang, you get hit with a ruler, right? Now, it's not necessarily a bad thing because then by writing with my right hand, I learned to access both hemispheres of my brain, just like Leonardo did voluntarily. I did it less than voluntarily. And so this actually helped me later on, whole brain thinking. Both hemispheres. So here is a creative tidbit. Whenever you're stuck on a problem and you're not making any headway, switch hands. Switch your hands to the other when you're writing the solution, and you'll access a whole new hemisphere of potential solutions. My mother, in the meantime, while I was stuck in residential school, was a telephone operator, earning what today would be incredible, 30 cents an hour or something like that. But here's the critical point. At night, she would get a job at this restaurant called 737, which is in Place Ville Marie in Montreal. And that was critical because as a hostess there, she met the top business people and accomplishing people of Canada, right? And so she had a whole series of dates with incredible people. So she met a person who had been an Olympic equestrian person. She met a person who had been a top swimmer. She met a top professional golfer. She met a professional tennis player. She met professors of all types. And this is me, when the equestrian guy let me ride his horse, and it's my love of animals. Okay? And then she met this strange character. Right? And we came, after the first couple of days, she invited him to our house. And after spending an hour with me, said this kid should be given this drug and should have this surgery, which is, for those of you who don't know, is a frontal lobotomy. And then she met this man. This man was critical in my life. His name was Lorne, and he was a Rhodes Scholar. also a top track athlete in university, and he had a great sympathy for mentoring me. And so he knew a guy who was very interested in learning disabilities. I'd never been diagnosed until this point as having Asperger's and dyslexia. I was just seen as a failure. So he put me into a class with one of his friends, and this is my grade 5 class. I've been taken out of residential school because he had the money to pay for it. And this teacher is vital in my life because he took me out of the classroom situation and had me doing independent study. And that was critical. That's what I needed to do my own thing without the stress of a classroom environment. And so that made the difference. The young lady beside me is also very interesting because in recess, I could never figure out, during every recess, she always wanted me to tie her up. I never figured out why. Anyway, so after this, I went to this school, which was also critical, Bishop's College School, which is a twin school to Brentwood here, and they have independent studies. So I never went to classes for my whole years of high school. I never went to classes. I studied in the library, and that was critical to my success because that's how I learned the best. And so this school and the teachers in it, I give great credit to. Okay, so then during the summers, my grandfather wanted me to learn the old ways, so he put me in touch with the Abenaki elders, and I learned how to make snowshoes, I learned how to make a birch bark canoe, I learned how to run a trap line, and then they prepared me for a vision quest. So I learned how to use a sweat lodge and how to address the Great Spirit, and I did a vision quest when I was 12. Anyway, the vision I had was of the wolverine, which we call the Alaskana. Which this is my vision. And it shows the link between the snow and the wolverine, and the snow represents the white population of Canada, and I was told that I would be a link between the white population and the native population, which is what I've done my whole life. Right? The second vision was of this office. I had a long talk with the person who occupied that office. Does anyone know whose office that is? That's Albert Einstein's office. I had a long talk with him, and he became my spirit helper. So I have 2 spirit helpers, the Alaskana and Albert. And he played a critical role later on. Anyway, so I'm going to show you this. This has a purpose, right? Now, I'm trying to show you an insight into my world, right? Because apparently I don't perceive the world the way other people do. I don't know. This is the only perception I know. But from talking to people, this is what a normal guy sees when he goes to the beach, apparently, right? Well, that's not what I see. I can't show you exactly what I see, but this is approximately what I see, right? If you can imagine this not in writing, but images that flash in front of your vision at very high rate. So within the first second, I'll see over 500 images analyzing what I see. So this is the essence of my creativity. I can see the flaws in design. So you see, I get inspired by the golden ratio, right? The ideal ratio apparently for women is 0.7, and she's a little bit less than the ideal. And looking at simple harmonic motion and resonance and DNA, so that's just what I would see if I see. So this is how my world looks to me. Every image I see has superimposed images on it. And apparently that's why I can see things that other people don't. So this is me. After I did my vision quest, I wanted to continue developing, and just by myself, of course, this drove my mother insane. I took the train from Montreal to Vancouver, my first trip to Vancouver, and I bicycled all the way back to Montreal, all by myself. Why is that important? It's important because if you want to be creative, you have to have huge chunks of time to think. There's no way to get around it. There's no royal road to creativity. You have to have chunks of time where all you do is think by yourself. Okay, and that gave me weeks and weeks and weeks by myself, apart from the farmers' daughters I met on the prairies. Right? Okay, so there I finally made it to university, right? And I decided to take the hardest program I could possibly get into, which was engineering physics program. And I will state without hesitation that every one of these people is smarter than me. And the question is, why am I standing here and not them? That's the good question, because every one of them is brilliant. I was amazed at how smart these people were, right? And I was always playing catch up with them. Perhaps one of the, and yes, this is, I love to design things, so I designed a beer can bazooka, which kids love, we loved in the residence. And I also designed a method of generating a sonic boom in residence using an elastic band, which I won't go into details. Anyway, this is how I went through university, because lectures were so slow. They drove me insane. I just could not stand listening to lectures. So I developed this system where I'd record all the lectures, then play them back at 5 or 10 times speed. So I can listen to a 50-minute lecture in 5 or 10 minutes. That worked for me. So I never went to lectures. Matter of fact, I missed more lectures than Babe Ruth had home runs. Anyway, so this is another critical thing, is that I saw this competition for professional engineers in the faculty lounge, and it was for designing a self-sustaining family habitation. And so I was only a first-year student. I think I was just 18 years old, and I entered this contest for professional engineers. And it turned out I won the stupid thing, right? And it wasn't because I was so brilliant. I just had the idea of looking at an ostrich egg that houses should look like that. And it just so happens that this house is immune to hurricanes, tornadoes, and earthquakes. But it's never been built because the technology didn't exist. But now with 3D printing, it is now possible to fulfill the vision of this house. Imagine the lives that could be saved by a house immune to natural forces like that. Anyway, so look at nature for your inspiration. Nature provides us all the tools we need to be creative. All you have to do is open your eyes and think and look. So I got this inspiration from the ostrich. Right? I went to Stanford to visit one of my friends, and I had the opportunity to meet this character. Do you know who he is? Richard Feynman, Nobel Prize winner, the youngest person in the Manhattan Project. Now, this was a very humbling experience because he asked a question, and I gave what I thought was a really good answer. And his response was, "That's not even wrong." So it was a very humbling experience. So no matter how smart you think you are, there's many, 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 many people a lot smarter. So stay humble in your life. Never become arrogant. Now, this is a job I had in the first summer of a university as a guide, and I loved this because I knew all the techniques for survival in the wilderness. I loved all wilderness stuff, and plus I got to spend a week in the wilderness with beautiful teenage girls. So how can you beat that? Get paid for what you love to do. And what was really good about this was that I would spend hours paddling these huge lakes in Quetico Park, which is between Thunder Bay and the Manitoba border. I just loved it. It's a wilderness park, no motorboats, no RVs, just wilderness, just the way the world used to be. And these hours and hours of paddling is what you need to think. There's no shortcut to it. And that's why it was a great job for me. Okay, then I saw an ad that said, if you want to be an exchange student at Oxford, apply here. And no one else in my class wanted to do it because it was disruptive to their life in Kingston, Ontario. And I applied. So always take the opportunities that are put in front of you, even if they look ridiculous. I mean, the worst that can happen is you'll fail or it'll mess up, but at least you'll get a new experience. So I went to Corpus Christi College, and I spent a term there at Oxford, and I worked at Harwell, the Atomic Energy Research Establishment, where I got exposed to high-energy laser physics, nuclear physics, and alternate energy technologies. And also, I had a scout. Do you know what a scout is? It's an elderly gentleman, usually a war veteran, who comes in every morning with your Times and the tea. "Hello, sir. Good day. Hello, sir. Are we doing well today? How's your studies going?" You know, and he gives you the newspaper, and it was great. I just loved it, right? And my roommate was a Cockney guy, and I still can't understand what he was saying all these years later. Anyway, so by going to Oxford, I went to lectures at Cambridge, and I met this gentleman. Do you know who that is? Hawking's. This is before he had ALS. He actually had just been diagnosed with ALS, and I learned a critical bit of information from him. I asked him, how is this going to affect your career? And he said something to me I'd never, ever forgot. He said, as long as there is life, there is hope. And I never forgot that. Now, I also met this gentleman. I attended a lecture by him. This was critical that I attended this lecture. Who is that guy? Edward de Bono, yes, the instigator of the modern theory of creative thinking. This is what launched me on wanting to know everything possible about creative thinking skills. So, see, by going to Oxford, by going to Cambridge, which I never would have done had I not looked at this ad and answered it, I got the opportunity to meet these people that influenced my life profoundly. Had I just stayed nice and comfortable in Kingston, I would not have had any of this. So, another rule. Always take the risk. Take the risk, because that's going to make the difference. Don't live a safe, comfortable life. Remember, a turtle only advances when it sticks its head out of the shell. Okay, I graduated with my degree, and it was the biggest recession in modern history since the 1930s. All my 7 job offers were canceled. I should also backtrack. In 1979, I was invited to an interview with a strange company, and I thought they had a ridiculous name because the company name was the opposite of Mega Hard. And I was interviewed by this strange guy with really thick glasses, and he only asked me 2 questions. Do you have a life? And write 8 in base to the -1. So apparently I answered the questions correctly because he offered me a job, but it was such a tiny little insignificant company that I didn't accept it. Anyway, if I had accepted, I would now be a billionaire, but then I would not have had a life. So I'm not sad that I declined the offer. But so you have to make choices in life. You know, do you want to be a billionaire but not have a life for 10 years? Or do you want to have a life and not be a billionaire? You have to make these choices. Right? Anyway, this was an opportunity. Yes, my 7 job offers were canceled because of the recession, but then there was a job in the Department of Epidemiology, the Faculty of Medicine. And so I went and started doing statistical analysis for them, and they thought I was really good at it. And so they paid for me to get trained up to the PhD level in epidemiology. This is how I got these experiences, because of recessions. Thank you, business, for giving me these recessions that prevented me from following a ho-hum life. Right? And when I was a student in epidemiology, I actually got to meet patient 0. Who's patient 0? The HIV, Guetin Dugas, the first Canadian to have HIV. And I interviewed him. And so I got to meet this guy and learn about, his lifestyle, right? It was very interesting. Anyway, so then I went, the people I met in Oxford had moved to Ecuador, and they invited me to come and stay with them for a while. So I decided, until this point, I'd been a sprinter. And after the Joe Clark boycotted the Olympics in 1980, I was so depressed by this. See, there's a whole part of my life I'm not talking about. But I decided I would go to Ecuador and train for the marathon. Now, why would I switch from sprinting 400-meter hurdles to marathon? Because marathon gives you the time to think. Right? You can't think in a 400-meter hurdles. You just don't have time to think. So I started to train at high altitude, and I trained with the local Indians. This guy, Louis Tipin, was an Ecuadorian champion. And I ran with the Indians, and we ran up to 17,000 feet. Does that number mean anything to anyone? What's the height of Everest Base Camp? 17,000 feet. We would train up to 17,000 feet. Anyway, so this was an incredible training opportunity. Once again, I had to risk going to a place that was different from everything I knew, and I had to learn Spanish, right? When I was in the mountains one day training for marathon, I met this guy from AID. What's AID? American International Development. His Jeep was stuck in the mud. I helped him get out. He gave me his card. We need engineers at the National Energy Institute. So I got a job at the National Energy Institute of Ecuador. There's Mimi Flores, the architect, brilliant, brilliant woman. We worked together to develop hundreds of new concepts, low-cost solar panels, passively heated solar structures, all types of new inventions, biodegradable things, and it's incredible what we did. So here I was in my early 20s heading an entire department. I could never have done that had I stayed in Canada. So get off your butt and move around. Go to new places, and you'll get opportunities you never even dreamed of. Right? I never could have, if I just stayed in Canada, this never would have happened. Right? And so I also traveled wildly around Ecuador, and I used my epidemiological knowledge to help the people. Right? So I eventually volunteered for Médecins Sans Frontières, which is Doctors Without Borders, and started vaccinating children, and I got to meet the local Indians, who I loved amazingly. They were incredible, benevolent, lovely people. And I learned so much, delivering babies, dealing with gangrene. Sometimes I was the only medical help they had, right? And it was just amazing experience. So so then I came back to Canada, and I did a master's in solar engineering, right, at Queen's University again. And that went really well until the price of solar collapsed, because the price of oil had collapsed, and so no one wanted solar anymore. So I had to reinvent myself. And so I had a problem, is that I said to a professor that he was wrong in class, and he gave me a failing grade in my master's program, right? And so as a result, I had a 79.8 average, and no Canadian university will accept you unless you have an 80 average to get into a PhD program. So there I go. I applied to every major graduate program in Canada, and I was rejected by all of them. So there I was sitting there. But however, I had sent an application to a relatively unknown place, the von Karman Institute, named after the famous fluid dynamicist von Karman. And I was accepted there. And I found out later that the head of the institute looked at my application and he said to the application committee, "This guy is going to be a real pain in the ass, but I want him." So here I go from being rejected from being a graduate student in Canada, earning $3,000 or $4,000 a year, to getting accepted to a graduate program funded by NASA and the US Air Force at $40,000 a year. So here's another rule. Rejection is sometimes the first, and failure is sometimes the first step to incredible success. If you keep driving forward. Life is a bicycle, and you got to keep moving forward to stay up, right? So take failure and rejection in stride, almost laugh at it, because you now have a new opportunity. So I got to work on the most exciting project in the world, the space station project. I had to design a heat transport system to cool the NASA space station. And they had no idea how it could be done because you could not have any moving parts that would contaminate the zero-G environment. I also worked on the hypersonic aircraft project for the US Air Force, right? Very exciting projects, right? So there's me in my laboratory working on the preliminary concepts. And this is where I first started thinking about 3D printing. So here you see my primitive evaporators with my initial experiments, and they were done with CNC machine, computer numerical controlled machines, which were automated cutting tools. And I thought to myself, there's a lot of waste in this thing. It would be better to do the opposite, build the part up from scratch rather than whittle it down. And I started to think about the possibilities of 3D printing here. Anyway, so I had the idea for using capillaries to pump fluid, the same way trees do it, and at the end of 4 years, we succeeded in developing a pump that could move 100 kilowatts a distance of 100 meters, and that's now the system that's now in the space station. I also developed a system that could cool the leading edge of the Aura aircraft that flies at Mach 8. Without the cooling system, the whole plane would melt. So I get the satisfaction of having contributed to these projects. Then my work came to the attention of this guy. You know who he is? Very few of you probably will know. It's General Abramson, who is in charge of SDI, or the Strategic Defense Initiative. He noticed my work, and he also noticed my arrogance. I remember a senator came to look at my work, and there I am experimenting, and this guy's poking his nose, and he goes, "Mr. Tinari, what's your work going to do for our national defense?" And I said, "Well, absolutely nothing, Senator, except to make the country worth defending." Anyway, so the arrogance paid off because this guy noticed my work, and so he got me involved in SDI. And so I had a whole series of high-level research projects with them, which remain classified to this day, so I can't talk about them. But the point is, get noticed. Be arrogant when you deserve to be arrogant. Be humble the rest of the time. And you will get noticed if you give 100% every single day in everything you do. And then there's no limit to how far you can go. Right? Now, I did not do this alone. I'm not going to stand here and say, "Oh, I'm brilliant and I did this." No, not true. I would be nothing without my team. This is the team that helped me get my PhD. Look at them all. Without them, I could not have done it. So this is my technicians, my assistants, my students. It takes a team today to do any innovation. And I want to stress that. Everything is now a team effort. There are no lone wolves anymore. So I want to give credit to my team that they helped me get to where I am. Now, anyone know who this guy is? After I graduated with my PhD, my work came to the attention of Admiral Hogg, who was a 4-star admiral under Reagan, and he was very interested in the work I was doing for fleet defense. And so I was invited to the Naval War College in Providence, Rhode Island, to give a series of talks on fleet defense. Now, I refuse, out of principle, to work on any type of attack weapon or nuclear weapons or anything like that. I only work on defense. That's my moral code. So I believe it's moral to defend the lives of your own soldiers, but immoral to take the lives of the enemy soldiers. So I work on defense. So I worked on a system to protect the aircraft carriers from swarm attacks of hypersonic missiles. So this now the system that's now being implemented in the newest aircraft carriers. Right? So there I am at the Naval War College. I'm affectionately petting an F-14 model there. Anyway, this is my design for a 3D printed nano-composite aircraft carrier. So it's resistant to missile attack, it's aerodynamic, it's completely different than any other previous aircraft carrier design. So radical change is sometimes necessary. It's estimated the current war games, before the installation of my defensive system, the current war games showed that the aircraft carriers would last exactly 7 minutes if there was a war with China or Russia. That's how long the aircraft carriers would last. And then we're talking about a $10 billion asset. So obviously that was unacceptable. Now this is my goal, to prevent this from happening. Prevent nuclear war, lead to a more peaceful world. So I worked on the Mars mission. The only way that the Mars mission could possibly work is with 3D printing. You cannot bring all the spare parts you need for a 2-year mission. It's simply impossible. But you can make the parts you need as you go along. And so there's me at NASA talking. I did 2 things. We talked about the use of 3D printing in NASA for the Mars mission, and I also heavily criticized their business model as seen by the Challenger disaster, which they did not listen to. And so as a result, Obama seriously cut their funding. It seems I'm talking in a vacuum sometimes, that no one ever listens. Well, that's the way it is. Yes, I was in the space program. However, I did get cut with the comment, does not work or play well with others. Of course, they're interested in my experience in low-gravity fluid mechanics, but if you can't get along with the other astronauts, well, it's not going to work. I have an open skies thing. I applied for a position in the senior organizing of the Vancouver Olympics. Now, why would I be qualified for that? Well, I worked in the Montreal Olympics, and I saw the corruption there and how it led to a $1 billion cost overrun. I worked as a consultant in China to organizing the Olympics there, right? So I studied the '84 Olympics. That was the first free enterprise Olympics that actually made a profit. So I was eminently qualified. Anyway, I put forward a plan during my job interview that would have reduced the cost by $1 billion in the Olympics. But then I learned about how politics works, and it's unacceptable if you're going to reduce costs by $1 billion, because then you're stepping on people's toes. So that was no job there. So now, which is just as well. Okay, so now we're getting into, you see I've begun to touch on 3D printing. Now we're going to look at the long-term impacts. First of all, companies like General Motors, General Mills, all the general companies are going to be going the way of the dodo. Why? Because now you have small, nimble companies like Local Motors makes custom-made cars, most of the parts which are 3D printed. They can react much faster to changes in customer tastes. It's estimated that if GM wants to change a cup holder in one of their cars, it takes like 7 months. Well, Local Motors can do it in 7 minutes. Right? So we're going to see a big change there. The assembly line is going to be changing to the assembly sphere. An assembly sphere can be fit into a garage in Port Moody, and it'll be able to assemble a fully functional car within 1 business day, custom made. You can choose what you want, gasoline-powered, diesel-powered, methanol-powered, electric car, whatever. Now, electric cars are critical. When people start building their own electric cars, that's going to be a real game changer. 3D printing will allow people to build their own electric cars for $5,000. And that's one of the projects I'm working on right now. Right? Now, that's going to affect everybody. UAW will be gone. Ford, GM, and so on will be gone. And imagine the employment impacts it's going to have. This is what I'm talking about, the revolution. It's going to change everything fundamentally. Right? Research and development facilities like we see above are going to be replaced by research and development modules. Everything you need to do research and development right there is right there in that module. So we're replacing an entire research lab. Right? All of these companies depend on the internal combustion engine car, all of them. Right? They're all going to go the way of the dodo as well, because electric cars don't need any of them. So, it's unacceptable, in my opinion, to have cars. Look, this car hit a bicycle. Look at the damage to the car. That is unacceptable. We're being sold crap. Right? Yeah, it's possible to make cars with dent-proof fenders. It's possible to make tires that will not go flat. Think of the money. Next time you fill your car with gas, look at the taxes you're paying. The biggest insult is GST put on top of the other taxes. You're getting taxed on a tax. With electric cars, all that is gone. Right? Look, spare parts. Companies make more money with spare parts than they do with the actual vehicles. You can now print your own spare parts. Throughout the world, you see these abandoned, perfectly functional motors and so on, generators and so on. They're only missing one spare part. So I'm planning to make a universal spare parts network where any machine that's ever been manufactured, you can download a spare part for it. If you need a scalpel in the middle of the Congo, you can download it. I mean, think of the impact it'll have on human prosperity and abundance. Right? This is a 3D printed car. It looks like. It can cross the United States on 20 gallons of gas. Superior to anything that the main companies make. Why? Because it was made by individuals. This is Joy's Law. Joy's Law says no matter how many creative people you have working for you, the most intelligent and creative people don't work for you. Right? There's a tire, a 3D printed tire, will never go flat. Much more durable than the crap we're using now. Now, the X-35 is probably be the last of the manned aircraft. It's going to be over 200 or 300 billion to develop. Totally unacceptable. What you see below, the X-47B and the B-3 bomber, are all 3D printed. They can be made for a fraction of the cost and much, much faster, and they can be autonomous. Right? Autonomous, you don't have to risk a pilot's life. This is the future. Okay, now we have our toys being made in China on assembly lines. Very soon, all your toys will be manufactured with machines like this in your own home. Big, big revolution. It's going to have impacts on numerous things. You can make really, really creative toys, or you can make toys that you'll never find in Toys R Us. Okay, now what does that mean? You're going to have container ships becoming extinct because you won't need them anymore. You won't have to move all these toys across the sea anymore because they'll be manufactured here. That's going to affect the unions, the longshoremen, right? What professionals were doing, we can now do ourselves. You break your lens, you go to a website, enter your prescription, you now download the design for the lens, print it out in polycarbonate, and you now have your lens for 99 cents instead of $600. You can print new frames as well and custom make them to suit you. So we are now doing what professionals used to do. What architects used to do. You now have the software. People can design their own houses. And not only that, print out their own houses. You can now print a house in 24 hours. So what used to be done this way is now done this way. This is now being done. I'm not talking about the future here. This is now being done right now. A whole house printed in 24 hours. Imagine the impact that has. Not only that, you can print the plumbing and the electrical at the same time. So and think of the trades you're eliminating. Right? This is normal fashion that you see in Paris and whatever. This is 3D printed fashion. Much more creative because Joy's Law. Why let the creativity hover at the top with Christian Dior and all that stuff, right? You know, let everyone be creative. Autonomous vehicles, a major game changer, will be enabled by 3D printing. Cars can now cross Los Angeles autonomously. It has many impacts. One of them is you don't need drivers anymore, but imagine trucks being filled with vegetables in California, driving non-stop to BC. You no longer need truck stops or food or anything like that. So imagine the impacts it'll have on the truck driving industry. I'm just saying this is what's going to happen. I'm not saying whether it's bad or good. It's just going to happen. It's inevitable. Right. We have a surveillance society enabled by new sensors, new cameras, and this is going to have a major impact on society. What happens when every action taken by a human being is observed? Right? There's a lot of things that we do in private we don't want to be observed, right? You know, well, what happens when you have a universal surveillance society? I don't know. Right? The Internet of Things can be enabled by 3D printing, where everything has an IP address. Even your shirt will have an IP address, and it'll say, you know, you really should wash me. And here's the Internet of Things. It shows the comprehensiveness of it. I don't have time to go into it, but research this for yourself. It's going to be every single item will have an IP address, will communicate with everything else on Earth. Is it good or bad? I don't know. It's just too new to know what the impact will be, good or bad or both. Right? And these are RFID chips. They're another major revolution. Research it. I don't have time to go into much detail. There's an old generation RFID chip on a finger for scale. That's an old one. The new ones are much, much smaller. So imagine you have your buggy full of food from the supermarket. You push it under an arch, and all the bill is instantly tabulated. You have your bill, and you pay with your credit card. You don't need cashiers anymore. You don't need, So you imagine the impact of that. Okay, also moats, really, really big, comes from remote, are intelligent monitoring systems, which can be used to monitor anything, like containers in a port, many other aspects like this. Research this. This is another game changer. Moats can be printed by 3D printers. That's why I'm putting them here. RFID chips can be printed by 3D printers. All this is enabled. Ray Kurzweil wrote the book, The Singularity is Near, the convergence of biology and technology, which is where technology accelerates to the point where it converges and we become indistinguishable from the technologies within us, right? He said what would happen, but he didn't say how it would happen. I contend that 3D printing will be the one that enables the singularity to happen. And you're already seeing it happen when 3D printers can print other smaller 3D printers, which print other smaller 3D printers, right? You know the Russian doll syndrome? Right? So here you see custom designed drugs. Now you say, the doctor says, take an aspirin, call me in the morning. In the future, you'll have an aspirin designed for your genotype, specially designed for you by a machine like this. Custom designed drugs. I love animals. 3D printing has now enabled animals. This poor winter, the dolphin lost its tail fluke, and you 3D printed a new tail for this unfortunate dolphin, which now is free to swim again. New legs for ducks, new legs for horses, new legs for dogs, and legs for people too, right? So everything is happening extremely quickly here. Now, printing of tissue, we see printing of skin for burn patients. There's a bladder that was implanted into a dog that had bladder cancer. You can do it in animals, but you have to get by the FDA for people. There's printing ears for people who've lost ears and so on, and that you can now print the vasculature inside the tissue as well, which was the big limiting factor before. The nerves and the blood vessels, so you can have a fully functional organ to be implanted. This means there are people sitting in this room right now who will live to 150 because you will have your organs replaced as they fail. So there's no reason you should die until you finally collapse from exhaustion at 150. Okay, so there's an example of printing out a blood vessel where I showed how it's done with stem cells. Okay, so here is breast implant, right? Breast implants are going to go the way of the dodo because why have breast implants where you can simply reprint any breast size you want? These will be your breasts with milk glands and nerves and everything else. They will not be artificial, right? So you can choose big, medium, or small, and enormous, right? And you know, you've had millions of men, especially in the United States, who've had the most sensitive part of their body removed without permission. Well, these men can now have that part of their body restored by 3D printing, fully functionally again. This will happen throughout society. Then the next generation of printers are molecular 3D printers that will actually print out DNA base pair by base pair. So the technology of Jurassic Park is now obsolete. Getting DNA from mosquitoes, no, that's old dead culture. Right now you print out the DNA from scratch. So you now not only can reprint out the DNA from extinct creatures like these hadrosaurs, but you can also invent brand new life forms that have never ever lived before. I'm not going to go into the morality of this, but you can see the possible impacts. Already, Japanese researchers from stem cells have made totally artificial sperm from a stem cell and a totally artificial egg, which fertilized each other to make a totally artificial life form, which they ethically destroyed. But who knows what would have happened. So we're on a cusp of an amazing 3D printed enabled thing. And I welcome you to the revolution. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Wonderful. Stay here. Now, I don't think I have my mic is not on. Can you hear me?
There's a lot of work happening in quantum computing. There's a lot of work happening in artificial intelligence. Have you seen Ex Machina, the movie? Oh,
yeah.
You guys got to see that movie. What happens when those things combine and 3D printing and all of this stuff does kind of converge? What's the revolution look like then for the long-term impact for all of us?
Okay, so the early revolutions in medicine have done an incredible thing because only 100 years ago, people had a life expectancy of 40 years, both men and women, right? So in only 100 years, we've brought our life expectancy to over 80. That's doubling it. That's incredible. So we may well see another doubling because of 3D printing. So what that means is that it was actually very inefficient before because people would die just as they were becoming very productive, right? So there's no reason we cannot remain productive into our 90s, 100s, 120s, right, with 3D printing tissue technologies, bioprinting. And this means that society will become more creative because the experience is very hard won. I mean, think of all the effort I did to get to where I am, right? And yet, a generation ago, I would have been dead by now, right? But now I can start contributing with this experience. Each one of you can now contribute into your hundreds, right? This will mean an explosion in creativity because creativity requires a huge amount of background experience. right, of what works and what doesn't work, and knowledge you got from critical people, right? This means there's going to be an explosion of creativity within society because of these enabling technologies. I think this is the most exciting time in history ever to be alive, to be at the cusp of another revolution. So we saw the steam engine start the Industrial Revolution. We saw the internal combustion engine. Now we're seeing 3D printing of all types. And so what I encourage you to do is there's three types of people. There's those who make things happen, those who watch it happen, and those who wonder what happened. Right? So I encourage you to be the first group of people to actually get involved. When you can afford it, buy a 3D printer, start playing with it. Learn how to use AutoCAD, right? Because this is going to be vital for your future, right? Start playing. It's a game, right? Play, fiddle, 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 and you'll be amazed. You're going to start making toys for your kids, for your nephews, so enjoy the revolution. Don't suffer through it. Okay, so
I'm going to call bullshit.
Yeah. Okay.
Bullshit. We had coffee a couple weeks ago, and what I like about hanging out with Paul is that he makes me feel very calm. And those of you who know me know that I'm not really terribly, don't laugh at me. But he makes me feel very chill. And I posed a similar question, and the version of the answer you gave me then over coffee was, the moment these things converge, and the singularity is inevitable, it will either be the greatest moment for humankind, which is the version you just painted, or it will be our immediate and utter downfall. And literally he went, Skynet. I was like, oh, no. Who has questions? I'm going to start there.
Hi, my name is Robin Anderson. Paul, thanks so much for your talk. I have a question. You describe a future in which manufacturing and transportation are radically transformed, and all of the manpower, people power that went into making those things happen is no longer necessary. Do you think, but all of these things that no longer need to be manufactured and transported still need to be designed. Do you think that all of that people power is now going to go into the front end, the design of these things?
Yeah, this is a question that come over and over again. In 1900, 96% of people worked on the land. And if you said that by our time, the 2000s, only 2% of people would work on the land, you'd say, well, what is everyone else going to do? Well, everyone else is now in the service sector, right? Or doing something else. So what I think this does is liberate people to be more creative, is that everyone has the capacity to be creative. Toyota Motor Company opens up the entire company to suggestions, and they encourage everyone to make suggestions. They get 37,000 suggestions every day from their line assembly workers, from their janitors, from everyone. Everyone has a brain. Everyone has a capacity to see things that other people haven't seen. So I believe these technologies liberate us from the drudgery of driving a truck for 12 hours, instead to design a better truck. Okay? And so I believe this is an enabling technology. Have you ever wondered, those of you who watch Star Trek, how the economy worked? Right? What did people do? Well, Picard explained it at one point. He said, we have been liberated from the drudgery of daily life of having to earn a living, so now we're free to explore our personalities, right? To learn how to fence, to learn how to kayak, to do all the things, learn advanced calculus if we want to do that, right? So our economy was going to head that way as well, where each of us is empowered to attain our full genetic potential as a human being, rather than having the pure drudgery of survival. That's how I see the optimistic future. Now, we've survived the possibility of the nuclear wars in the 50s, maybe by accident, I don't know. But it shows that there's hope for humanity, that safety systems were built into these weapons to prevent them from being launched accidentally and so on, that it worked, right? We haven't been destroyed by nuclear war. And I do not believe we'll be destroyed by the singularity either, that we'll learn to adapt and become a better species for it. I think it's going to be a happier, better planet in the long term. Already, look around, that compare the pollution in the 60s and 70s in Vancouver, compare that to now, how clean the environment is compared to that. Sure, there's tons of problems. There's deforestation, old growth forests being raped and so on. Yeah, there's still lots of problems, but they're a lot better than the problems from 40 years ago. So I have hope for our species. As long as there's life, there is hope. But remember that each one of us has a responsibility to contribute to that positive future. Whenever you do a negative act, the repercussions can go everywhere. Whenever you do a positive act, a selfless act of helping someone else, or picking up a piece of garbage, or protecting one tree in your neighborhood. All these things have repercussions. So I impose upon you the following responsibility. Don't wait to be asked to help. Whenever you see something that needs to be done, just do it. You can ask for forgiveness later. Next question.
Okay.
I think traditionally, as technology has moved forward, we've had cultural changes, and I think that the cultural changes have not quite kept up with our technology. As all of these things start to come true, where do you think our greatest challenges are going to be as a society, as we lag behind culturally in the technology changes?
Okay, the biggest challenges will be from the entrenched special interests. Look at the reaction that the community in Vancouver's had to Uber. Right? Almost a violent reaction, right, to this change, right? But yet a lot of people wanted Uber. It was prospering, right? The company's a multi-billion-dollar company around the world, and yet it's being blocked. Well, you're going to see GM fighting back, using its political power in Washington and in Ottawa to try and stop these technologies. But since it's a grassroots movement, it's unstoppable. That's why I encourage each of you to be part of this revolution and give it momentum, because for the first time, we've democratized creativity. Rather than being concentrated in research labs at GM and large companies, we are now, from a grassroots, democratizing creativity where everyone can design houses as beautiful as Ericsson designed. Everyone can design their own toys for their kids, custom designed toys. Everyone can design their own jewelry for their loved ones. People will be able to manufacture their own diamonds. You want a 50-carat diamond? Build one, right? We'll be able, you laugh, but you'll be able to do this, right? The Navy is already building diamonds, right? As good as natural ones, better than natural ones because they have no flaws. So I'm not joking when I say you will be able to do anything. So do it.
Max, did you have a question? I heard a rumor you had a question. So how old are you, Max?
8.
8.
How long did it take to develop the 3D printer?
Okay, the first mention of the technology was in 1636. Was a mathematician who described how you can take any solid object and break it down into an infinite number of parallel planes. That's the basic the way you 3D print something. Break it up in a number of layers, and then you print each layer, layer by layer by layer. So it's taken us 500 years to get this far.
How's that, Max? No big deal, right? I'm going to try to get to you, so I'm going to do this like this.
You mentioned playing around with AutoCAD before, like to familiarize yourself with the technology.
Yep.
Your talk was very inspiring, and I'm the type of person, I'm sure, like a lot of people here, that have a lot of ideas. But what are the practical things you would do, like if you just abandoned what you were doing now and said, I really want to access this technology? Like, would you recommend a course, or is there anything practical specifically you'd recommend for people like us that want to access this channel?
Well, first of all, don't quit your day job. Okay, secondly, the resources are there. For example, there's programs available for free, like SketchUp, which you can download for free. And they have videos that show you step by step how to use it. So all you have to, I'll tell you how I did my PhD thesis. I said every single day, you have to have a rule, and you never break it. Every single day I wrote one paragraph of my thesis, starting from day one. And just by following that rule, I ended up with a 1,000-page thesis a year ahead of anyone else who started with me. It's not such a difficult rule. So what you could say, every day I will watch one video that will teach me one new way to use SketchUp or use AutoCAD or whatever, just one video. And at the end of the year, you will have how many videos? 365 videos you would have watched, right? It's simple, and yet you will learn and learn and learn. Every day should be a learning opportunity. And never before in history has any possible scrap of knowledge that humanity has accumulated is now available on the net. Just look at YouTube. There's videos to do anything. You want to learn how to play tiddlywinks, it's there, right? So use these resources. They're there. They're free.
I thought he said if we wanted to learn how to play tiddlywinks, but that might have just been me. So we are out of time. So who feels really strong about a question? Here's what I'm going to suggest. I'm going to pick 2 questions, and everybody else, if you can post your question to us on Twitter or to Vancouver Creative Mornings. I will forward it to Dr. Tinari, and he will get us back questions.
Yeah.
We will respond back. You had your hand up. You're feeling good about this? Solid?
Thanks. My name is Pablo. So Paul, this sort of kind of reminds me of the sort of desktop design revolution with a computer where suddenly everybody had access to designing, and kind of what that did to the quality of the design. That just out there, what's going to happen to the quality? I mean, everybody's going to be able to design something now, but the expertise is still very sort of secluded at this point. So what's going to happen on that?
Okay, well, what's going to happen is you're going to have intelligent software. Artificial intelligence has had several false starts over the years, but now it's finally getting a grip, and it's going to allow you, for example, to design a bicycle, but not screw it up so that it's structurally unsound. The software will tell you that part is not capable of taking the stresses that you're going to put on it. And so the software will work with us to help us overcome our own intrinsic incompetence and lack of knowledge, right? And so that's the good part, okay? So that is what's going to enable us to all become more significant contributors. So you may be able to design a beautiful, elegant bicycle, but you have no idea about structural engineering. Well, that's where the software comes in, helps you out, right? And so you may not be able to design like Ericsson as an architect, but you can get close with the help of the artificially intelligent software, which will tell you, no, this is badly oriented because it's going to overheat during the summer. So that's where the software will come in and help you. So you'll have all the knowledge of a solar engineer, an architect, a structural engineer at your fingertips. This, once again, is unprecedented. This allows you to do what only professionals used to do.
One more.
Yeah.
Thanks for the talk. It was really good. One thing I didn't hear you touch on for 3D printing was food. So I'm wondering, especially you talk about all these industries being disrupted, all these people not having jobs anymore, if they're not able to make an income or things like this.
Have different jobs.
Different jobs, yeah. But I'm curious, I guess, the impacts on food.
Okay, well,
and
chefs
sort of
are,
basic needs.
that's interesting because I've been invited by a chefs organization to give a talk on the impacts of 3D printing on the food industry. It's interesting you brought that up. But there's no time to go into it. Already, wedding cakes and so on are all being decorated by 3D printing. So you can take a picture of the bride and groom and put a perfectly designed image on the cake of the bride and groom in excruciating detail. Every wart, every imperfection there, right? And you can even go farther. You can scan in the bride and groom and put them as little figurines on the cake. So a lot of stuff is already being done. But I've heard that they had a test where they used 3D printed steak, a sirloin steak, and they had a natural steak and a 3D printed steak, and the chefs could not tell the difference between them. So it's getting to the point where you can actually print food. Now, if you think about it, it's much, much more efficient than growing food, right? You don't need the feedlots, you don't need the huge cows that are farting everywhere and you're making mess, right? So instead, you are printing the food very efficiently. 3D printing is an incredibly environmentally sane technology. To make one car, an assembly line requires 1 million gallons of water. To make a 3D printed car requires 0 gallons of water, right? You see the environmental impact. Plus, there's no waste. 3D printing has very little waste. So same thing with food. Printing a steak, much more efficient than growing one in the field. So we're going to see increasing amount of 3D printed food appearing in our shelves, and these will be completely safe, not like your GMOs.
Where does the source material come from?
Stem cells. You take a stem cell from the cow, and you program it to become a rump, right, muscle, and then you print it in the proper...
You need carbon, and where do all the molecules come from?
Well, you have a nutrient mix that feeds into the cells. That I'd have to explain it, but believe me, it's a natural process. The same way nature makes steak. How does nature make steak? The cells divide. The animal eats, extracts the carbon and nitrogen, feeds the cells. That's exactly the way 3D printing works. This is why I love 3D printing, because it follows nature's plan for growth. Instead of starting with a block of something and whittling away, you start with one cell and grow it. Okay. So.